Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news coming out of Columbus this morning as one of the top quarterback transfer portal targets, Will Howard, former Kansas State quarterback, expected to visit Ohio State sometime later this week. And we kind of always said, as we talked about Ohio State in the transfer portal, is they're a team that when they want to turn up the heat on a quarterback in the transfer portal, they're going to immediately put themselves in the inside track to land that quarterback. Because you look around the country, I don't think there's a more attractive quarterback one position across college football than right there in Columbus. And a guy like Will Howard, many of you guys know, I've talked a lot about Will Howard. I'm a massive fan of Will Howard. I want to talk Will Howard, what he could bring to Ohio State. I want to also throw out another quarterback target that I think Ohio State should at least do some due diligence in, and then talk about one other prospect I think would be a phenomenal fit for the Ohio State Buckeyes in the transfer portal. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. This has been just a phenomenal last couple of weeks in college football. I've had a blast talking about all the roster moves. The amount of support you guys have shown, it's been amazing. It means a lot. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, we're going to talk about Will Howard. We're going to talk about another quarterback transfer target that I think could really do some things at Ohio State. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts, opinions on that quarterback position for Ohio State. And without further ado, let's get into Will Howard. And the first thing I like to talk about when you're talking about a quarterback like Will Howard is some of the intangibles that he brings to the table. I mean, at Kansas State, he was just a winner, right? In 2022, wins a Big 12 title with a team that is certainly not as talented as the likes of Oklahoma and Texas. So when you're evaluating quarterback, and a conversation that I feel like doesn't get had very often is that quarterback a winner? You know, you can talk about the touchdowns, the completion percentages, the interceptions. That stuff will all play out. But I'm really concerned with a lot of these quarterbacks. Have you won at the college football level? And a guy like Will Howard certainly has shown that. And you talk about why he's had so much success at the college football level. He's a guy that, I mean, is a phenomenal leader. He's a phenomenal athlete extending plays, can play off script a lot. Now, talking about Will Howard as a passer, this is what excites me the most about Will Howard potentially winding up at Ohio State is on paper, 5,700 yards, 48 touchdowns to 25 interceptions, only a 58% completion percentage. There's still meat left on the bone. He's not necessarily the most polished pocket passer that's available in the transfer portal. But what excites me about Will Howard and what excites me about watching Will Howard is you watch him and say, there's a lot of meat left on the bone in terms of what Will Howard can be as a pocket passer. And there's not a better spot for Will Howard to wind up at and get developed into that pocket passer than the Ohio State Buckeyes. He has all the tools, right? 6'5", 240 pounds. He has a phenomenal arm. There is not a throw that he can't make on the football field. Now it's just dialing it in, getting the on time, the accuracy, kind of getting some of that stuff a little bit more smoothed out. But from a physical tool set standpoint, there's not much that Will Howard can't do on a football field. And then you talk about what he brings as an athlete. And this was something that, in my mind, held Ohio State back in a massive way in 2023. Kyle McCord, when stuff broke down, I mean, really just could not make plays. Now, C.J. Stroud was one of the better pocket passers we've seen at the college football level, and I'm sure Ohio State fans have seen what he's done in the NFL. Even C.J. Stroud, who wasn't known as a dynamic dual-threat quarterback, he could extend plays. If stuff broke down, he can get outside the pocket, give his wide receivers more time to create separation, pick up the chains had he needed to. Kyle McCord really didn't offer that. Like, if the play wasn't there from the pocket, there was very little ability for Kyle McCord to get outside the pocket, extend plays, make nothing something. Will Howard can do that for Ohio State. So that's something that I really enjoy. And then another thing that I love about Will Howard, he's a leader, and he's tough. Like, this is a guy that is 6'5", 240 pounds, not afraid to use his legs, not afraid to put the shoulder down. And I mean, he's bigger than most linebackers that are trying to tackle him. And from an intangible standpoint, many Ohio State fans I've seen on Twitter, I've seen on the message boards, kind of frustrated with the lack of toughness that this program has showed over the last couple of years. The leadership often starts with the quarterback position. And a guy like Will Howard is one of the better leaders you see in college football, but more importantly, he's tough. Like, you want your whole team to be tough. It starts with the quarterback. Will Howard, one of the tougher quarterbacks that you see. You talk about injecting that kind of culture in this locker room. And I think Will Howard certainly could do so. I would be a huge fan of seeing Will Howard in Columbus. And many of you guys know I'm a Michigan fan, so it's like me saying I like Will Howard to go Ohio State. I don't love saying that, but I think this would be a really good fit for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, another quarterback that I think would be very interesting for Ohio State to at least kick the tires on is a guy like Kaden Salter. Now, Kaden Salter, a very interesting story here, came out of high school as a top 50 national prospect, ends up transferring to Liberty in 2023, threw for over 2,800 yards, over 35 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, also ran for over 1,000 yards. So you talk about another quarterback that is going to raise the level of this offense. Kaden Salter checks that box. And again, going back to Kyle McCord, the biggest knock on Kyle McCord was he was a guy that wasn't necessarily going to elevate the offense in any sort of way. He was a guy that got elevated by the offense around him, right? Guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., Travion Henderson, and Emeka Egbuka. Kyle McCord had success because of the players around him, not necessarily him elevating everyone else's game. The previous Ohio State quarterbacks, you're not saying that sort of thing, right? C.J. Stroud elevated everyone around him. Justin Fields elevated everybody around him. Kyle McCord didn't. I think a guy like Kaden Salter, I think you could say the very same thing for Will Howard, is going to elevate the talent around him and let this Ohio State offense reach its ceiling. It always felt like Kyle McCord was kind of holding Ohio State's offense back. There really wasn't as high of a ceiling as you saw with a guy like Justin Fields or C.J. Stroud. You put a guy like Kaden Salter into this Ohio State offense, and I think you see that ceiling kind of go through the roof for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And once again, this is an Ohio State team that it sounds like Kaden Salter might wind up at Auburn because of his connections with Hugh Freeze. If Ohio State wants to get involved in this recruitment, puts Kaden Salter in a really tough spot to say no to Ohio State. Because at the end of the day, the Ohio State quarterback one position probably has to be the most coveted position, maybe outside of USC, in all of the country. So if Kaden Salter and Ohio State if Ohio State wants to get involved with Kaden Salter, I should say, it would make it very hard for Kaden Salter not to take a long look at the Ohio State Buckeyes as a potential landing spot. Now, those two quarterbacks are the options that really stick out to me, right? But I think there's some other positions that Ohio State needs to address. And we've kind of talked about this with Ohio State. Ohio State's not a team that needs to go into the transfer portal and get 20-plus guys, because we know how Ohio State does it on their recruiting trail. It is one of the best teams in terms of stockpiling talent. You look at that Ohio State roster, it is one of, if not the most talented roster in all of college football. So there is not that many guys in the transfer portal that really would elevate this Ohio State team or come in and be massive impact players. Now, one guy that I think would be a massive get for Ohio State is former five-star offensive lineman Lance Heard. And we said this and had this conversation kind of over and over again for Ohio State. Out of all the positions that Ohio State recruits, what's the one position where it seems like they're missing on their top targets? And you can't say that for the wide receivers. You can't say that for the quarterbacks, the running backs, and quite frankly, most players on the defensive side of the football too. And, Ohio State normally has the pick of the litter for most of these position groups. The one position that, quite frankly, Justin Fries just missed on is the offensive line. The recruiting out of high school has not been great, and that's why you had to see Ohio State go to the transfer portal after spring ball and get a left tackle. And so a guy like Lance Heard from the 2023 class has multiple years of eligibility, would be a massive get for Ohio State. And the MO on Lance Heard is not that he's not transferring from LSU because he couldn't play for LSU. He would have been one of the 5 starters on that offensive line. He wants to play tackle, right? But you look at LSU's roster, they got 2 NFL caliber tackles who aren't draft eligible yet. So that playing time at the tackle position wasn't there for LSU. That does not mean anything about what Lance Heard could be at tackle. Quite frankly, he could be better than some of the tackles that they have right now at LSU. Ohio State, we saw what that offensive line looked like against Missouri. I get the quarterback play was less than ideal, but that offensive line didn't do any help. And you want to make sure you're shoring up that offensive line, injecting talent into that unit that just quite frankly didn't have the talent. I think Lance Heard, a massive target for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the last guy I want to talk about here, and hearing rumblings that Ohio State is going to be hosting him on a visit, is graduate Derek Graham coming from Troy. Now, this was a guy, UC's 24/7 sports recruiting profile, super underrated coming out of high school. And you take a look at what he did in the 2023 season, 523 pass blocking snaps, 19 pressures. He's up to 315 pounds. This would be another offensive tackle that comes in and provides immediate competition in this Ohio State room. And I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you're looking at where do we need to address, what position groups do we need to address heading into 2024? It is that offensive line. So a guy like Lance Heard, a guy like Derek Graham, two top targets for Ohio State. Now, the picture for Ohio State and other portal targets will get more clear as we get our answers to some of these guys. Are they heading off to the NFL draft? Are they staying for one more year? But right now, if you're Ohio State, you're looking at the quarterback spot, a guy like Will Howard, a guy like Kaden Salter, and you're looking at the offensive line spot, specifically the offensive tackle with Lance Heard, and Derek Graham. Those are some of the targets that have emerged for Ohio State. Again, Ohio State fans, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section regarding the quarterback spot. At the end of the day, I trust Ryan Day to get this quarterback position right. You know, whether it's Devin Brown, whether it's Lincoln Kienholz, whether it's true freshman Aaron Nolan, whether it's Will Howard, Kaden Salter, or another target from the transfer portal, Ohio State's going to get this one right. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.